Hello there and welcome back. So, Spare is out and I finished the book and I'm here with a couple of highlights that stood out to me. As we all know, this is a 410-page book, so there's a lot of ground to cover. Now, when I say I read this book. I did not skim or skip over any chapter. I read it cover to cover. So I cannot wait to get into this, and I've got to say this is not a market substitute. I would encourage you all to go out there and read the book. After all, you want to get to hear it in his own words and not have any sound bites. So I'd encourage you all to go out and read it. So these are my highlights. So settle in, grab a cup of tea or a snack or some drink. We have a lot to talk about. So let's get into this. The book has, I think, been one of the most honest accounts by someone from the royal family in the UK. The book has eye-catching chapters that will just draw you in. Prince Harry, he knows how to make you see the sights and smell the scents. He does lay out in such vivid detail so much of what is going on around him. That was something that was very standout as well. So let's get into these highlights. Okay, so the Duke of Sussex talked about his early life at school, and of course the thread will continue here that he had academic struggles, but he does talk about his mother. So he describes the last conversation that he had with her that night, the night in Paris. He said that he had been playing with William and their cousins, and he said this quote, "I had been short with her. Impatient to get back to my games, I'd rushed Mummy off the phone." And then he continues to recount how he was awoken by the then Prince Charles at Balmoral Castle the morning after Princess Diana had passed. And he writes this quote, "He sat down on the edge of the bed, put his hand on my knee. 'Darling boy, Mummy's been in a crash,' he said." So he always talks about the fact that King Charles, or the then Prince Charles, used to call him darling boy. It's quite interesting that I will interject here and say that he, in this book, does paint a very affectionate portrait of his family, though he does also highlight the fact that they were not great at physical expressions of love, as in hugging each other, and that physical touch was not such a big thing for them. But he does say that his dad used to call him darling boy. So when his dad had informed him that his mom had been in a crash, he says this, that he remembered waiting patiently for Pa to confirm that indeed Mummy was all right, and he said that he did not do that. So he says that he did not cry, not one tear, and that Charles did not hug him. He just said he put his hand on his knee and he said it was going to be okay. And he does also continue to give this moving account that he did not believe that Princess Diana had actually passed away. He says this, quote, "With nothing to do but roam the castle and talk to myself, a suspicion took hold, which then became a firm belief. This was all a trick. And for once the trick wasn't being played by people around him or the press, but by Mummy," end quote. So he believed that she had run away to make a clean start, and that he shared his theory with William, who at some point had also believed something similar. He had entertained it for a very short time, but he ultimately had discarded it, Harry wrote. So he does give this touching account where he said he had dreams of her coming back, and he also goes on to say that there were days he would wake up and think that that would be the day that she would reveal herself to the world and call William and Harry to go and be with her. So that is so sad. And that thought persisted in his head, though he says that there was a part of him that would argue in himself to just let it go, but he had that firm belief. So it's also interesting to note that his aunt on his mother's side had also given him a box with Diana's hair. That was so absolutely touching. And he said that there was once when he did cry. It's when her coffin was lowered into the ground at her final resting place at Althorpe. He said that was the only time he cried. He said that he did not cry again throughout his youth. So let's jump forward. He talks about his first trip to South Africa with his dad. He had come home from school. It was a break, and his dad did not want him wandering around the house, so he took him along on that official trip to South Africa. And Prince Harry, you see him giving this very endearing account of how he thought he would have Pa, as he called him, all to himself. So he encounters Africa for the first time. He has his first meet with the Spice Girls, and there are these very cute images online of him just looking up at them. So sweet. In some images, you can just see how he lit up looking at some of them. And he said that Baby Spice was wearing white plastic shoes and she kept pinching his cheeks, and Posh Spice as well. She was, looking at him and clutching his hand. And he said that he spied Ginger Spice, the only Spice with whom I felt any connection, a fellow Ginger. So yes, once again, he points that out. So he also talks about his own struggles, and he mirrored them with his own dad's struggles in boarding school. He talked about the fact that, his dad had been bullied, he was a bookworm, and he empathized with him. So that will come into play later as they try and embrace Camilla being in his life. And he does admit that he and William did acknowledge that their dad at the time was very, very lonely. So he talks about mother figures in his life, a very interesting portion in the book. He talked about the time when he was at school, and he said that there were these matrons who used to take care of the younger boys who were more so like mother figures to them. They would wash some of their hair and take lice out of their hair as well. And he says as he grew older, it became awkward for him because he says, quote, they were suddenly hot. So it was interesting. And he also talks about the fact that as he aged out of, the levels of care that they could be afforded to give them, like washing them and on, he went on to detail how he was under the care of those who are very strict. And he says that at the time he was going through so much. And he talks about using drugs. He said that he would smoke pot at Eton School and watch Family Guy. And he recalls that when they would get high at Eton, he and his friends knew that it was wrong. They knew that they were wasting an Eton education. He also talks about how one tabloid editor printed a story about him doing drugs and that he insisted it wasn't true. But when they did find out later that it was true and he expected the palace to squash the story, he was hurt by the fact that Charles and Camilla, according to him, allowed the story to get out so that Charles would seem like, a more sympathetic figure as a struggling single dad with a drug-addled son. That's when I think they started to catch on to how press could be used to prop up someone and put another one down. And later on, another editor claimed to have a photo of Prince Harry, using cocaine. He insisted it was a lie. And of course, he had been doing cocaine around the time. He called the editor's bluff, and that story kind of just went away. So I think that, in fact, that editor knew something but did not have proof and wanted to gain some foothold into the palace. So he said that when he was trying to shut down that claim, it was a lot going on. I think there was a huge celebration concerning his grandmother. I think it was one of her jubilees, and he watched her with so much admiration. She had gone from event to event, and he saw her stoic, composed, and he felt like when he had gotten away with that lie, he felt like he too could channel what the queen had in her stoicism, and he absolutely admires her. That is one thing that runs through this whole book, is his deep and abiding love and respect for the queen. So in my previous upload, I did detail how when Prince Harry had initially joined Eton, that William had basically instructed him to behave like they did not know each other. And while that, of course, may come from a place of where older siblings sometimes do not want to get, quote, stuck with their younger brothers or sisters, they want to just be apart from them, that for Prince Harry, who had not seen William in such a long time and had such a love for him, it did hurt him that William did not seem to want to hang out with him at all. It talks about how Harry had to start again in trying to get friends, and there is this heartwarming account of his friend Henners, who was very close to Prince Harry at Eton. They got into all kinds of adventures together, hopping over fences to eat strawberries and getting caught. And it was just so endearing to know that even a prince has done that. And I think that's a story that is so universal. I think kids everywhere have done something silly of that nature, plucking fruits from other people's gardens and whatnot, and getting into all kinds of issues. So I found that so absolutely sweet. They had so many dreams, and they would talk about meeting up later on. And at that time, Harry details this very interesting account that Charles sat him down to discuss his future post-Eton plans. and he told his dad that he wanted to work at the fondue hut at a ski resort where Diana used to take them. And his dad was like, that's not happening. He also entertained the idea of becoming a ski instructor. Famously, we all know he wanted to be a safari guide, and he talked to his dad about all these things. Talk about him trying to find a way. Once again, very endearing. He did not have a clue what he was going to do with his life. As he always says, for William, everything was mapped out. But for him, the quote spare, there was quite a lot of figuring out to do, but he did know he wanted to do something. So he said round and round they spoke until he landed on the army, and his dad was like, yes. They all had conceded that Prince Harry was having a hard time academically, he had a hard time concentrating, especially after his mother's passing. His dad felt that he should do something physical, and they all encouraged him, and he also had that dream of being in the army. So Harry and Henners at some time later met up and talked about their dreams. Henners had told Harry about his dream of being a teacher, and Harry, kind of being surprised by that, saw it in him that Henners loved to teach. And they also talked about, perhaps they would meet up at some point in a military career as well. That was just such a sweet story. Just when it leaves you on that high, that this whole tale took a turn when Henners, his childhood friend, his close friend, actually also died in a car crash. And Harry writes, recalling attending the funeral with William, just like mommy, in quotes. And yet, unlike mommy, there was no way to spin this as a disappearance. This was death. No two ways about it, end quote. So that was so sad. This book really details the Duke of Sussex's highs and lows, and that was just a gut punch as well to the reader, because you saw a lot of highs and lows before that, how he handled his mother's passing, having those dreams that she would come back and the hope that she would, and having William kind of distanced from him, his dad unable to show physical affection, his family having that German stoicism, and all wrapped up in that whole Windsor British stiff upper lip, compounding that. And he needed someone to reach out to him, and he had his friend Henners, and then that happens. Ugh, that was just so sad. I read that, I was just like, oh my gosh, talk about detailing the highs and the lows. So let's jump forward in time. We'll jump over Prince Harry being in a play, and where he talks about his dad laughing at all the wrong times. And he says, as I said before, it's interesting. He does paint a very affectionate portrait of Charles. He did try. He talks about his gap year, where he went to Australia for a while, and I'll focus on where he went to Africa. He talked about going to Lesotho and all his good work there. And he also talked about his very first interview there in Lesotho, where he talked about wanting to carry on his mother's legacy. And he also detailed that at the time, that thought that Diana was still somewhere out there was in his head. So when he talks about his mother's death, when you look back at that footage, when he's asked the question, you can definitely see the cognitive dissonance as he's answering the question with all this new information that we have concerning this book. And then he also is asked about his dating life in that interview, which he found very interesting. But this was a standout. He said that he was shocked to find that he was the first to be speaking about Diana's passing, considering William always went before him in almost everything. So he said that after that interview, he had, quote, gallons of beer and smoked an entire bag of weed. So you could see he was making some good choices and a lot of poor ones at that time. And he also talks about now his ex, Chelsea Davy, and how he also met her in Africa. He said, quote, unlike so many people I knew, she seemed wholly unconcerned with appearances, with propriety, with royalty, end quote. And unlike so many girls I met, he said, she wasn't visibly fitting herself for a crown the moment she shook my hand. He went on to say, she seemed immune to that common affliction sometimes called throne syndrome, end quote. So he recalled his first kiss with her under the stars in Africa, and he does detail the fact that he did love her so much. But he said the paparazzi got in the way. They would hound him and hound her, and in the end, she could just not deal with that, and the relationship buckled under all the pressure that she was going through. And the book really does spell it out. She went through a lot. So as I said in one of my previous uploads, he details an infamous Nazi outfit. He gives it a bit more context in the book, how it got a laugh out of Kate and William. And he talks about the cringe theme of the natives and colonials theme that was for that particular party, how that got into the press, and how he had to do his whole apology tour. And he said it was interesting. He thought that his dad would chew him out, but he found his dad very sympathetic towards him. And he had that meet with a rabbi who basically took him through why that was so wrong. So he covered that in the book as well. So it's interesting. He doesn't shy away from some of the mistakes that he has made. As I said before, Harry in this book acknowledges that William and himself could see that their dad was lonely. And though they had thoughts about Camilla, they did acknowledge that she did make him happy. He also claimed in the book that William and himself had urged their dad not to marry her because they felt like it would make, issues more difficult. But when in the end they saw that he was going to go ahead, that he said, quote, "We pumped his hand and wished him well, no hard feelings. We recognized that he was finally going to be with a woman he loved, the woman he'd always loved." He also went on to say, "Whatever bitterness or sorrow we felt over the closing of another loop in Mummy's story, we understood that it was beside the point," end quote. So, she's folded in, she becomes, his wife, and Harry feared that she might be a wicked stepmother to him or mean to him. But he says no, she wasn't. And like Willie, he says, "I did feel real grateful for that." He also does admit in the book that he felt like she would be kind of taking their dad away. And it kind of did turn out to be. He, kind of got wrapped up in his whole life after the honeymoon with Camilla, kind of sequestered away at Highgrove. And in a way, he felt like they did kind of lose him after the wedding. So yes, another low where he felt like someone had exited his life. Also interesting in the book, he does detail his time in the military in a lot of vivid passages in this book. He documented his gruesome training, what they went through. Goodness, the absolute strength of will for him to have actually joined the military and gone through all his training and completed all that he was supposed to do is just, I tip my hat to him. It was so intense. He talked about graduating from the Royal Military Academy in Sandhurst in 2005 and serving with the British Armed Forces for a decade. He talked about his 2 deployments to Afghanistan, the first time going over to the war, completely undercover, hidden away from everyone, and the second time being able to join his comrades and, as they all got into that frame and mindset of going to war together, brothers in arms. And as I said before, he talked about the grueling training that he had to go through. He also talked about completing his elite training to fly Apache helicopters, which for me says that whole through line that Prince Harry, he isn't very bright. I think that just falls flat on its face when you read how much he had to put into learning how to fly that massive machine. And, he just has so much respect for those who trained him. And you can sense that they had that mutual respect for him. So he talks about all he had to do in the war and that he wanted to complete his time in Afghanistan in the war with his conscience intact. He wanted to make sure that he didn't do anything that he could not live with. So it's also quite fascinating that as he headed to the war, and I should have said this before, that he says before he was shipped off to Afghanistan, at that time he was together with Chelsea before they broke up, and she had promised to wait for him, that he was approached by, I think, some courtier who said, what would he like to happen to his remains if anything should happen? He said that he wanted to be buried at Frogmore Gardens, writing, quote, "It was beautiful and slightly removed from things, peaceful," end quote. So in this book, there is this thread of him talking about death and being exposed to it. And sometimes he would go into such vivid detail with his very tangible confrontations with the subject of death, whether it was him talking about the kings and queens who have gone before him, who are buried at Windsor Castle or in St. George's Chapel or even at Frogmore Royal Mausoleum in the grounds of Windsor Home Park. He also talks about Edward and Wallace as well, who are buried somewhere there in the grounds. And, it's interesting that he chose a place that was removed. He wanted to be out of the way on his own, very peaceful. And it made me think about, where Diana's final resting place is there at Althorpe, her own little island surrounded by, nature and all that. So it was a very interesting thought that he wanted to be away from it all, even in his resting place. So interesting. And he talked a lot about death in this book, whether, his mother or on, or just figuratively speaking, how he felt some things were metaphorical for like losing people in quotes. So yeah, as I said, this book details a lot. So quite a lot of lows, but there are highs too. And he also detailed that sense of loss concerning William's wedding, where though he said he loved Kate and he loved William and he was so happy for them in this new life, he felt yet again that he was going to lose William somehow. And in a way, as he details in some excerpts of his book, he kind of did. Kate and William started off in their new lives, and then later on as they got children, that his own vision that he would be popping over every now and then to play with, his new nephews and nieces, that did not materialize as he thought it would. So in a way, he said that he likened weddings, though happy and joyful occasions, and that he was indeed happy for the people, he felt in a way that it was a kind of funeral because he felt he was losing the people in his family that he loved as well. So a lot of lows, but there are highs as well. As we all know, the Duke of Sussex, as he returned back from the war and he saw the wounded and those who had fallen, that's when, after a while, the idea in his head was formed after a trip to the US, where he thought about launching the now Invictus Games, the adaptive sports tournament for injured, sick, and wounded service, personnel, and veterans. And he knew that there was healing power in sports. So in the book, he details trying to launch the games and all that he had to go through. He said he went to William, who, he said, quote, appeared supremely irritated by the idea of holding that event, who knows why. And William suggested to him that the event would drain money from the Royal Foundation. That was the charity that they both had founded in 2009. And Harry said that was absurd of him to think that. And he wrote this, quote, had we not gotten over that, all of the stuff about the heir versus the replacement, were we not a bit too old for that tiring, childlike dynamic? He said this, he was married and had a baby on the way at the time. Meanwhile, I would order food alone and do my dishes in front of the sink. My father's sink. I still live with my dad. The game is over, man. You win, end quote. So after some back and forth in the end, he did manage to launch Invictus Games. He really pursued that and went after that till it was launched. And we all know it was just an amazing success. He also talks a bit later how he got the Queen to have that video with him, and everyone's so surprised at the Queen's funny streak, those who did not know her, intimately or know her that well. Of course, everyone else around her knew that she had a very great sense of humor, but a lot of people were so surprised to know that the Queen was comedic, and Harry in this book details that very loving relationship that he had with her. And it's interesting to note that in all of that closeness and all the admiration he had for her, he kept talking about the fact that he wished he could hug her. He wished he could hold her. And he also writes about this account of where Diana was reported to have wanted to hug the Queen, and it was just a total fail, something right out of a comedy script, as the Queen sidestepped or something of that nature. He just wrote it down so funnily, and I think everyone just kind of knew to have that respectful distance of, Her Majesty the Queen. So it's kind of sad that he loved her so much, but because of that whole structure there, that he could not just throw his arms around her and express that love through physical touch. He was really yearning to do it. He said that his family were not big on physical expressions of love. And through no fault of their own, he did say that was the whole culture there, just keeping a stiff upper lip, not letting the press have any sign of emotion leaking out of you because they would exploit that. And to one another as well, it translated behind the scenes. They all had this very put together attitude, even in the face of so much difficulty. They would not break down in front of each other and on and on. So there was this hole in him, I think, for that love after Diana was no longer there, being surrounded by that atmosphere. And he does talk about his time in Africa. So he talks about this couple that he met in Botswana. And for him, they are like a second family, and you learn why. So when we talk about this book and love from a family that he desperately craved, he details this account about Tanya Jenkins and Mike Holding, who he feels are his second family in Botswana. He got to know them in his time in Africa. And he talks about how, they had really embraced him and gave him that love that was so lacking in his life in his early years. And he also talks about how Africa has such a special place in his heart. He truly does lay it out in the book. There was this hole in him, I think, for that love after Diana was no longer there, being surrounded by that atmosphere. And he does talk about his time in Africa and how for him that was a place for healing for him. And through this book, you really see the journey of how Africa has been pivotal in him healing internally and feeling love, not only in the surroundings of the environment that he was in when he was in there, but some of the people he came across in Africa. So he talks about this couple that he met in Botswana. He talks about Tanya Jenkins and Mike Holding, and he says that they truly took him under their wing following the death of his mother, and he had such a close bond with them. And he has such affection for them as well in the book. They really helped him as a teenager. And he details this story where he is in the middle of this conversation with them, and this boisterous and loud banter back and forth, and he mistakenly called Tanya mom. And that pause, the book just puts that so vividly to you as a reader, so well in how it structures that. But in the end, he is told he can go ahead and call her mom. And as I say, they were so instrumental in his life. And one thing I love about the couple that he was with in Botswana, they really did encourage Prince Harry that he had to do more in Africa, not just have a take relationship, or as some of his ancestors had done, but give back. And I love the fact that he acknowledges that. So Prince Harry took that to heart and wanted to do more work in the continent. And while some people have been having a field day making fun of the alleged physical assault that Harry talks about, where William came at him a couple of years ago in the kitchen, and just having all types of fun with that, or saying that boys fight all the time. Indeed, Harry writes about a lot of the squabbles that they've had and boy brawls, in quotes, that they've had throughout the years, throughout their early childhood into being teenagers. They had a lot of physical fights, typical of boys, as some would say. But while that incident in the kitchen stands apart, this one particularly stood out to me. So in this account, Harry and William have this fight really concerning work in Africa. And this was what Prince Harry wanted to do. He wanted to help others do good in the world based on what he was also advised to do. And, Africa had been close to his heart, and he wanted to dive in deeper. But William said to him, quote, that Africa was his thing, and that he had the right to say this or felt this because he was the heir. And so he says that they almost came to blows in front of their childhood mates, the sons of Emily and Hugh, he said. One of the sons asked, quote, why can't you both work on Africa? So William had a fit, according to Harry. He flew at one of them who had asked that question for daring to make such a suggestion, and he told him this, quote, because rhinos, elephants, that's mine. And this is what he went on to say, quote, I let you have veterans, why can't you let me have African elephants and rhinos, end quote. And he says that his friends were aghast. Keep fighting, they said. There's room for both of you in Africa. There's need for you both, end quote. So for me, I think for me and a lot of Africans listening to that, it's first of all a question of, what is that? As I said before, the book details a lot of these sibling rivalries, but this, for me, it truly is petty. And I've got to be honest and say that in my heart all along, I've been having this hunch, this thought in my heart, I'll put it like that when Prince Harry was a working royal, that certain parts of Africa were off limits to him. and were kind of William's territory, if I can say it like that. That's not because anyone has said anything to me. That's just something that I felt so strongly in my heart, and because this story for me was more like a confirmation. Now, for me, when I heard the story of William proposing to Kate in Kenya, and I'm a Kenyan, of course, so that kind of piqued my attention. I've always wondered, for example, like why Prince Harry had in the years not come to certain parts of East Africa and to Kenya, and only William was the one who was coming to Kenya, and it's like he had some kind of territory here. And I've had that thought in my heart, and no one has suggested anything to me. That's just something that I've been strongly feeling in my spirit, that some parts of Africa were off to Harry, and this for me confirms it. And I would love to see Prince Harry know that indeed there is room for everyone. And while no one in Africa is waiting for any kind of white savior, that Africa is welcome to everyone who wants to do good. For Prince William to have reportedly said that Africa is his thing, I truly hope to God that that's not a mentality he possesses, because right now there is a shift that is happening in Africa, whereby when the West was once seen as a strong ally, in quotes, that a lot of that is shifting away as people have been re-evaluating many of the relationships over the years that African countries have had with the West. I'm talking about the legacy of colonialism and the lack of acknowledgement and apologies for that, which has just, I think, started the other day, as well as the legacy of predatory loans. I'm sorry, I've got to say this, that white savior mentality has come under a lot of scrutiny. So I think anyone who is approaching Africa from a perspective that they are the ones who have all of the answers, I think that's being done away with. No one is looking for any royal to come in and do anything that the locals on the ground are not already working in. People right now are shifting away and making new decisions for themselves. So I hope he does not possess a mentality that Africa is looking to him for anything. They're not in any beggarly postures. They're not looking for anyone to come in and have all of the answers. People in Africa are now looking for partnerships that are collaborative, that are not predatory, that are not, from a structure where someone is coming in to preach down to people. And when we think back to Prince William a couple of years ago, making a statement on African people having children, that was met with tremendous backlash on the continent. So I think he needs to evaluate his own perspective on how Africans view the royals, view their legacy, and view him in Africa. And I think he will come to be surprised to learn that Prince Harry, in his struggle to protect his wife and children who now have African ancestry, may be able to connect with people on the continent in a whole new level. For sure, people on the continent now have a whole different way to connect with Prince Harry. And that's besides having those qualities that make people just want to be drawn to him. He's laid back, people feel at ease in his presence. I'm just saying right now, what people have witnessed him go through, people on the continent, people across the Commonwealth, where they are predominantly people of color, they will connect with the Sussexes on a whole different level, having watched their struggle, having watched particularly Prince Harry and how he's had to sacrifice so much to protect his wife and kids who have African ancestry. Do not tell me that the level of connection will not be on a whole different plane. I think that might be something else he has to acknowledge as well. I don't know how he's going to take that. I think Harry in his book has detailed all of the rivalry between these brothers. So indeed, I do believe if someone sees something that they can do and they can do it well, that they should do it with their whole heart. And anyone wanting to do good, whether they are local to the continent or international to it, I think it's wrong for him to dissuade his brother from being in any part of Africa. And I, as an African, as a Kenyan, as an East African as well, I would like to say that, yes, there is room for everyone in Africa. And I also put in this appeal to everyone. Africa is always warm and home and welcoming to everyone who is there with a good heart, not exploitative as we've seen in the past, but we would love to have anyone there with a collaborative spirit towards Africans. And I especially want to put this message to people of African descent in the diaspora who have been fed a bunch of perspectives on this continent that are specially crafted to keep them away. Africa is welcome, it's home, and it's home to them, and it's home to everyone, as I said before, who wants to do good. So let's move on. So as Harry documents in this book, he had issues finding someone to love. They would not put up with the press stalking them and making their lives difficult. And they were followed by the paparazzi. This was Chelsea Davy until she could not take it anymore. She wanted freedom and she could not see her life, being like that. And Harry, by the way, he did not blame her. The pressures of dating a prince were so much. For the women who he had approached, he talked about quite a few of them. And now enters Meghan. As we all know, he first saw her on an Instagram video where she had this whole filter on her face. And he talks in the most loving words about that first moment when he laid eyes on her. Heart melting. So he says this, quote, "This woman stopped the conveyor belt. This woman smashed the conveyor belt to bits. I'd never seen anyone so beautiful. There was an energy about her, a wild joy and playfulness." And he added this, quote, "I'd never had a firm opinion on that burning question, is there just one person on this earth for each of us? But in that moment, I felt there might be only one face for me," end quote. We all go, ah. So yeah, he talks about meeting her and their first date. He continues to give that account as well, and how they quickly found a way to meet up again. And he also talks about their first trip to Botswana together. And he said that when they got there, he looked at Meghan as she was unpacking. And he said that he had stereotyped her. He waited for her to take out the mirror, all of the fancy things, because, he just had this whole thought about who she might be. And he was surprised that she was unbothered by the way she looked, and they had so much fun under the stars. He does talk about that in his, in the series as well, where, she in the night was startled by elephants outside the tent, and he promised her that he would keep her safe. So the book goes into all of that. And he also goes on to say that he introduced her to members of his family, first Eugenie and Jack. They absolutely fell in love with her, and it made him more confident to introduce her to other members of the family. He said that he took her to see the Queen first. They had that whole moment of her having a curtsy there, and there, of course, less dramatic. She curtsied, and her and the Queen had a nice talk. Then he also details her going to meet Charles as well, which was cool. She said that he had Meghan wear less makeup because, King Charles did not like people who were, caked on, and they hit it off. As he said before, they had a great time, and that Meghan wore her hair down because, Charles liked it like that. They had a lot of things in common. Charles approved of her at the time. And then he said he was so nervous, but in the end, he took her to meet William and Kate. We all know about that. William told him after a while to slow it down, despite the fact that, according to Harry, they were fans of Suits, So we're going to get into that. And, on and on it goes. So he also details how he had to plan to propose to Meghan, and he was told by some of the courtiers that he had to ask the Queen's permission. He has a very comedic moment trying to figure out how to ask her, and I think the Queen, just being discerning as she was like, out with it, and he asked for permission, and of course she gave it in her own, her own tongue-in-cheek and very cryptic kind of way of like, yes, go ahead. So he finally proposed to Meghan, and they started off planning out their new lives. Of course, Meghan now knew that she had to stop her work as a full-time actress. So this is when the story takes a strange turn. Casually one day when they're driving, Charles just said to Harry that would Meghan plan to continue acting? And he says this quote, "Well, darling boy, there's not enough money to go around." And he said this quote, "I can't pay for anyone else. I'm already paying for your brother and Catherine." So Prince Harry wrote that he believed it was not about money, but that he did not want to be overshadowed by Meghan. That was what he deduced by that conversation. So it was strange, yeah, right? I like how he says it in the book. Wouldn't she have to stop acting because she's in Canada and I'm in the UK? So like I said, she doesn't eat much, when he was trying to get his dad to see his point of view. So that was interesting. You could already see things bubbling. And he also felt like the press, in all of their stir-up concerning Meghan being biracial and typecasting her, that the family, who apparently have all the newspapers fanned out before them, tabloids included, were starting to get this sentiment that Meghan was not a, quote, like right fit for Harry. She was not, your typical English rose. And even Harry concedes that he was warned from his childhood that Americans were, quote, too loud, too rich, too happy, too confident, too direct, too honest. And he did not agree, he said. He thought that Americans didn't fill the air with polite snorts and throat clearings before coming to the point. Whatever was on their mind, they'd spit it out like a sneeze. And he went on to say that that might be problematic at times, but he usually found it preferable to the alternative. So yes, yet again, that is one of the reasons he fell in love with Meghan. She was so proactive in coordinating and making sure they were always in touch and would not go more than 2 weeks without seeing each other, and how she was the one who had to bear the burden. He also talks about how Meghan, she went out of her way, truly sacrificed having to fly back and forth to see Harry every now and then, because of course he, in his position as Prince Harry, would draw too much attention going to Canada every now and then. So she had to really go out of her way to keep that relationship going. So yes, we do see the ugly side of royal life, as the Duke of Sussex recounts in his book the coverage that took over when it came to the Duchess of Sussex. His most intense criticism of the British tabloids, who, as we've all witnessed, are notoriously aggressive in their clickbait and misinformation and their, dog whistles, as he said it. So he called them out. He shone a light on the toxic relationship that the royal family has with the tabloids, and he also called out the headlines that they had against Meghan and the impact that they had on her. He really did show quite strongly the effect that it had on Meghan and her family and her dad, the whole breakdown of that relationship that has been talked about in detail. And in the book, while he revealed that the press had been instrumental in his previous breakdowns with his girlfriends, he was determined to not have that be the outcome with Meghan. So he lays it out in full length. He calls out the tabloids for those headlines saying that Meghan was almost straight out of Compton, how she had been upwardly mobile from a slave to a royal in, I think, about 150 years. And talking about all of the comments that had been out there by people who were in prominent positions in the UK, he talked about it and he blasted it. He asked in the book that how could his fellow countrymen do that to him when he had brought Meghan over, and I felt that plea when he said it in the book, to even in the end step his wife away from it all. In this book there is, as I said, a lot of vulnerability. This is honest account like we've never had it. So he talks about all of the, the tiffs that they had there in the royal family, the misunderstandings that they had. I'll touch on a few. Harry talks about all the rivalries that they've had in this book, and it has a wide range. I'm talking from petty squabbles to even alleged physical fights, as we all know. And he has talked about the disparities and how he and his brother were treated from an early age on, and William kind of having this heir and spare dynamic with him, even ordering him to shave his beard at a time. And they also talk about how the pilot training became a thing between them, and Harry going off to war and William being held back, and how that also could have led some tension between them. Of course, we all know about the account concerning the bridesmaid dresses and Meghan allegedly making Kate cry. So it turns out that Harry had a, quote, clear the air meeting with himself, Meghan, Kate, and William. In the meeting, Harry wrote that William and Kate were upset because Harry and Meghan hadn't given them Easter gifts, and that he and Meghan were upset because William and Kate switched place cards and changed seats at their own wedding, but they said it wasn't them, it was someone else. Kate then demanded an apology from Meghan because of the whole baby brain comment. And of course, it all has that climax of them having that argument in the kitchen when Meghan was not there, where Prince Harry alleges that William basically came after him in some kind of physical altercation where they called each other names, and, Prince Harry's necklace was ripped off and knocked to the floor. We've all heard about that. And, it was interesting to me as I read this book that even as the press were, asserting and assuring everyone in the public that Prince Harry was so out of the loop with his own family, it was quite interesting to read that they would find times where, King Charles and William and himself would get time and talk together. Yes, perhaps sometimes those conversations would end in some kind of screaming matches where, Charles would plead with them not to make his later years a misery and all that, but they were trying to have some dialogue. That's why I do believe that in all of this, that, Prince Harry does want reconciliation. So this book, as I said, it touches on a lot of these squabbles and altercations. So the story continues to unfold on how the press suddenly had bullet points concerning their desire to step back. And that's how Prince Harry just comes out against, that whole toxic relationship of leaking on members and trying to craft narratives on members. And Prince Harry has made it clear and he has spoken up about that without holding anything back. In this book, there are passages where he just excoriates that kind of behavior, not holding back. Those who have been engaged in that, especially the press who have done anything that's underhanded, they have felt, his ire. So the story fast forwards about him and Meghan stepping back and how, finally Tyler Perry houses them. And Prince Harry talked about how he has always had, some armed bodyguards with him. He had, a tracker on him. And, for all of his security just to be pulled from him at a moment's notice, even his own bodyguards were pleading to stay with him. And I love the honesty in this book, very vulnerable of him to admit that the purse strings were being held by his dad. He had been kept in that state where he was not encouraged to have a sense of independence. And so, cut adrift, he had never done so many things for himself. It's amazing to me how much Meghan, even when they were back in Frogmore, she would be ordering furniture for him with her credit card, and now he's just cut loose from the family's funds and having to make his way in the world. This is not the way to treat your own, right? So I commend Prince Harry for having had this baptism of fire and having to stand up under it and figure out how he was gonna, be there for his kids and be that breadwinner from day one. And as we've seen, it worked out. They finally got a home and, they are happy. They have their children. He talks about delivering Lilibet himself. And Meghan tells him that that's not a spare, that's a man, in quotes. So that was a very beautiful moment to see how hands-on he is, not just when the cameras are on, not just turning on the charm, in quotes, but he does actually love Meghan. I always think back to Tyler Perry saying so, and indeed, this book, it just highlights it. He has such an unabashed love for Meghan, and yeah, that's just such a blessing. So in this book, Prince Harry talks about seeing a psychic or clairvoyant, someone who he says has powers, in quotes. She told him about something that had happened to him if I was to give any advice to him, I would just tell him to stay away from that. And while some may think that this might be all superstitious, people who are in the know not to double up in any kind of occult or stuff like that. Just totally stay away from that kind of thing because, contacting dead spirits, stay away from that. Prince Harry, I say that from the bottom of my heart. I think a lot of us out there, and I think a lot of people who are aware of the negativity of that kind of seeking out that kind of world or those kind of, quote, powers, it's not superstitious. It's something that he does not want to open up himself to, especially now when you're protecting your family. That's what we say in the faith. Don't give the devil a foothold. Give him an inch, he'll take a mile. And you're trying to protect your family, stay away from that. And if he wants to seek out anyone to pray for him or give him spiritual insight, he has someone like Tyler Perry, someone who has the Holy Spirit and who can direct him to people who just want good for him, not people who are trying to empty his pockets. I, for one, I'm going to give someone, it's not a plug, it's not me, trying to pitch anyone to anyone, but I know someone personally who is so filled with the Holy Spirit. That man of God could tell you everything you ever did and everything your great-great-great grandmother ever did. And that for me gives me an assurance that you don't need to seek out any, dark arts to have any direction in life or to get any kind of comfort. It's interesting. The whole book, I did see, this whole thread of Prince Harry looking for some type of peace. He was taking joints, or, he was trying cocaine at some point. And I know that Meghan has given him a sense of purpose. But, there's only so much people can do. That whole line, "you complete me," it's not true. You have to find your own inner peace. And as I said, this man, he's called Prophet Quist. Amazing man of God, not into your pocket or into your wallets. Such a gem. And I'm so grateful to God that I found that man. That man one day spoke to me and told me something that I did not even know about me. And I had to go and check it in some documents. How he knew that, to this day, only God, because no one had told me that. I had never had that conversation with anyone in my family. It was in a document that was written well over decades ago. So only God, right? So yes, there is spiritual power out there. I would just encourage Prince Harry to seek the right kind. And I encourage him that from my heart. So a lot to go into in this book. As I said, it's a 410-page book. You'll learn that people in his family do headstands. He will tell you all about the baths in Balmoral with the brownish colored water. He will tell you all about his dad and the moments that they've had together, where they discussed their similar problems in the tabloids. There's just so much to go into. And above all, you will see a man who loves his wife and children, and he has promised them that he will protect them. So this is a beautiful book. I'd encourage you all, as I said before, to go out and read it and get to know his heart, his life. My highlights here are not a market substitute. So in all I've shared, I want to know now your highlights in the comment section below. Before we log off, as always, a special thank you to those who support this channel. To my Patreon, PayPal, and membership supporters, I would like to say thank you. I would like to say thank you to you, Cookies and Cream. Thank you, Cookies, for being a member on this channel. I am so thankful to God for you. I say God bless. Thank you to Dorothy Ross as well, another longtime supporter of this channel. Dorothy, thank you for all you do. You mean so much to me. And thank you to Helene Gruen. Thank you so much for all the ways you engage, your comments, your love, your support, truly meaningful to me. And thank you to Bonnie, who goes by the handle B10Pow. Thank you so much for supporting this channel through so many ways, in the super chats, in giving through Patreon. I just want to say thank you. I love you from the bottom of my heart. And now a special thank you to those who gave during the last live. I would like to say thank you to you, Bonnie. Yet again, thank you for your super chat. Thank you for every super thanks. Thank you to Raw B for your super chat. Thank you so very much for that. And thank you to Carol Lund, who as well is a channel supporter. I would like to say thank you, thank you. And a special thank you to those who gave through PayPal. I want to say thank you to you, Gail Tapscott, who as well is a supporter of this channel. Thank you so much for your generosity. It truly does mean so much to say. I want to say words cannot express how grateful I am to God for you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you once again for all of you who support this channel financially. I'm so thankful that you are in my life. I value the support that you give this channel. Thank you. And for those who like, comment, and share, I do appreciate you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, click subscribe, let YouTube know you enjoyed what you watched, and leave your comments below. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Have a blessed one.